Hi, everyone. My name is Imran Ahmad. I'm a partner here at Norton Rose Fulbright, and I'm delighted to have with me today Jeremy Wyatt, who is a member not only of our technology law practice, but also of our privacy, cybersecurity, and data governance group. So, welcome, Jeremy.
Hi, Imran.
So, I know you and Roxanne Caron and other members of our Quebec team are tracking very carefully every development related to privacy legislation, data governance in the province of Quebec, amongst other things as well. But I know there's been a lot of activity in that space. And we talked to Roxanne a little bit about the guidance that the CAI has come out with. But I think you're going to talk to us a little bit about cross-border data transfers and how PIAs play into it. So can you just to level set, when is a PIA required when you're doing a cross-border data transfer?
Yeah, of course. So PIAs, and this was mentioned in the Law 25 that was adopted in 2021 and came into force in 2023. But PIAs will be required in a cross-border data transfer context before communicating personal information outside Quebec, and also before entrusting a person or an organization outside Quebec with the task of collecting, using, communicating personal information on a business's behalf. So it's really important to keep in mind that the PIA needs to be conducted as soon as there's a cross-border transfer component, but more importantly, at the beginning of the project and before any transfer is actually done of personal information.
Right. And just for our audience, a PI is not a straightforward process. It's quite involved. Can you talk about some of the elements or factors that go into preparing a PIA?
Yeah, of course. So, of course, those factors will depend from the context in which the PIA is conducted. But in a data transfer context, a non-exhaustive list would include, and this is all set out in the guide, we're talking about the sensitivity of the information. So obviously, the more sensitive the personal information you're processing is, the tougher questions you kind of need to ask yourself and the more in depth you need to go. We can also think of the purposes for which the personal information will be used, the safeguards, both contractual and otherwise, that are going to be kind of implemented to benefit and protect the personal information. And finally, the legal regime that's applicable in the state or jurisdiction where the information will be disclosed, in particular with regards to the personal information protection principles that will be applicable in that jurisdiction.
Well, that's an interesting term. So, what exactly are these, what we call generally recognized personal information protection principles? Like, it sounds like a pretty vague description. Can you give us a bit more detail?
Yeah, of course, it is a pretty vague description, and it's something that everyone in the industry was really looking forward to getting a bit more details about, and we're very happy that we've got a bit more guidance from the CAI on this point now. We still don't have a clear definition of what those principles are and what it means, but the guide does indicate that we're talking about general rules that ensure the protection of personal information and also that ensure the respect of the rights and interests of the data subjects concerned by the personal information. And the guide also specifically presents a number of principles, but they do state that it's not an exhaustive list. So we might actually have more than what we've got. So we're talking some principles to consider are that of responsibility. So a business's responsibility with regards to the personal information that they might process, identifying purposes, so ensuring that the purposes for which personal information is collected are adequately defined, limiting collection to the personal information that we need to see kind of the extent to which businesses can collect specific information or just generally get any information they want. Of course, rules around consent and obtaining a valid consent mechanism. The concepts of privacy by design and privacy by default would also fall under the general principles, as well as limiting use, communication, and conservation to what's needed or required by the collection. We also need to consider the accuracy of personal information. Of course, we want to make sure that data subjects, as much as possible, have a chance to ensure that the personal information that's used and processed regarding them is accurate and that it can be amended as need be. Security of personal information, of course, is always at the forefront. Transparency as well, ensuring that organizations and businesses disclose their practices, what they do with personal information. And finally, we need to consider individuals' rights. So what rights do they have on their data? And also what rights of action they might have if they're unhappy with how their data is being processed by a business.
Let's, although I'm recognizing it's not an exhaustive list, it's still a pretty good list to start from. So definitely a place where you can spend some time as an organization, get a sense of what your requirements would look like, looking at
Absolutely.
those key principles. Last question for you. I know we're limited on time, Jeremy. So you talked at the outset of having a PI done before you do a data transfer. Talk to us. You've done the data, sort of the PIA. Now, what do you do with it?
So of course it doesn't stop there. It would be too easy if it was just to do the PIA and then shelve it. You need to actually implement your PIA. So what Law 25 requires is that following a PIA, the disclosure of personal information outside Quebec will need to be subject to a written agreement between the business collecting personal information and the business to whom they're transferring personal information outside of Quebec. What the agreement needs to do is take into account the results of the PIA, and if necessary, it'll need to include agreed upon terms and conditions to mitigate any risks identified in the PIA. So the idea is that this agreement kind of operationalize the PIA to make sure that any risks that were issued or any defaults or lacks in the protection of personal information will be addressed from a contractual perspective. And maybe as a closing note, the other element to keep in mind after conducting a PIA, entering into the required agreement, is that a PIA remains a very dynamic approach and a dynamic and evolutive document. Your situation with regards to the processing of personal information can change if you change providers, jurisdictions in which data is transferred, if there are any legal developments in your jurisdiction or in foreign jurisdictions. So those are all elements that might warrant revisiting your PIA and amending any solutions as need be in the future. So that's something else that businesses should keep in mind.
Very good. Very good. Jeremy, like I said, that's all the time we have today. We could have spent much more together. So thank you for that. Thank you for tracking these developments. I'm sure we're going to be talking about some of the other developments which are literally underway right now. I know there's a lot of debate happening in Parliament with the C27. I know today the minister, also Minister Champagne, came out with a voluntary code on artificial intelligence. I'm sure we'll be coming back to you and the team on that. Thanks again, and thank you for our audience for listening in today. We'll be back with further updates in the very near future.
Thanks, Imran.
Okay, bye for now.